Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. We have Amy Nathan. She's the author of more than 15 books, including Together, an inspiring response to the separate but equal Supreme Court decision that divided America, Making Time for Making Music, Round and Round Together, and A Ride to Remember, a Civil Rights Story. And her new book, available March 24th, is called Riding into History: The Surprising Story of Sara Keyes Evans and the Fight to Desegregate Bus Travel. Amy, it's such a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And so in her book, Amy wrote, 3 years before Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to move to the back of a city bus in Alabama, another young black woman, Sara Keyes, led the way with a similar act of courage. Shortly after midnight on a hot summer night in 1952, a bus she had boarded many hours earlier in New Jersey stopped at a lonely bus station in the small North Carolina city of Roanoke Rapids. Just 23 years old, she was traveling by herself. A member of the Women's Army Corps, she was wearing its dress uniform, a signal that this young woman had stepped up to help her country while it was engaged in the war in Korea. A new driver took charge of the bus in Roanoke Rapids and ordered Sarah to move to the rear so a white Marine could have her seat. She told the driver she was fine sitting where she was. No one stepped up to defend her when police officers took her to jail. She spent the night locked up all alone in the filthy jail cell, not knowing what might happen next. Her bravery that night is not well known, nor is the effort that Sara Keyes made to win justice, with help and support from her father, David Artis Keyes Sr., and from a young black woman lawyer, Dovie Johnson Roundtree, arguing her first big case. So for us, kind of reading this sounds like such a fascinating story. I mean, because, we're so used to the sort of pillars of the civil rights movement, and it's kind of easy to think that this is sort of it, right? I mean, everybody else was sort of, I guess, somewhat of either a background actor or kind of like a support system, which in many cases, obviously, even the leaders were as well.
Mhm.
So can you tell us a little bit about, before we even get into the actual story, so who was Sara Keyes? So what do we actually know about her life, about her upbringing?
Well, she grew up in Washington, North Carolina, which is down the southern part of North Carolina on the coastal area. She lived on a farm. Her father was a farmer, and of course, as you might imagine, there was a lot of segregation then at the time that she was growing up. She was born in 1929, and her father often took jobs, construction jobs in other towns or in other states even to earn money to keep the farm going. And her mother ran the farm with help from people that he had hired. And she had to do a lot of, chores on the farm, as did her sisters and brothers. And she had an unusual education in that her father helped start a parochial school in Washington, North Carolina. Now, he had gone to what was called a vocational school, high school there in Washington, North Carolina, and had heard from friends that there were more opportunities in the other Washington, the nation's capital. So shortly after he graduated in 1914, he, on his own, without telling his parents, moved to DC and lived there for until it was time for him to enlist in the military for World War One. And
Mhm.
during that time, he got to know Dunbar High School. He attended it, he says, and although we were not able to actually corroborate how long, because they didn't have any records from that
Hmm.
at Dunbar High School, but he was very proud of having been there. And at Dunbar, which was the best high school for Black students in the United States, um, and people actually moved to DC so their kids could go to Dunbar. He learned that there was a different kind of education than what he had received in Washington, North Carolina. This was a strictly academic education. So when he moved, he became a Catholic while he was away from Washington, North Carolina. And when he moved back, he the Washington, North Carolina's Catholic Church was destroyed during the Civil War, so they were having online services. A priest from a nearby church would come to Washington, North Carolina, and he would hold services for Black people in a rented room in a building there. And so at one of these services in the early 1920s, um, uh, Sarah's father asked the priest what is there something that can be done for my people?
Hmm.
And that led to discussions with the priests in New Bern and also with the Archdiocese. And they said, okay, well, let's start a Catholic school in Washington, North Carolina. And he helped find the land for it. And that was the school that she attended and all of her brothers and sisters, called Mother of Mercy School. And the teachers came from a an order in Pennsylvania, and they came down, and they were all white sisters, white nuns, and they taught a strictly academic curriculum, which was unlike what was being taught in many schools for Blacks at that time, where there was this thought that only vocational education would be appropriate for Black students. So
Hmm.
she got a very academic, and the nuns were very strict about insisting on excellence. And so she had a totally different upbringing that you might expect for someone growing up in this little small segregated town in North Carolina. And I
Wow.
think that is what gave her the courage to uh, to stand up. I mean, she didn't stand up in an aggressive way, but to not put up with the insult that was delivered to her when they accused her of being disruptive and arrested her for not moving to the back of the bus.
Hmm.
She actually had no idea why she was being asked to move to the back of the bus. She thought that she was able to sit wherever she wanted on a bus because there had been this earlier Supreme Court ruling called um, Morgan versus Virginia, which had said that on interstate buses, a Supreme Court ruling on interstate buses, a local state's segregation laws could not apply. So
Hmm.
she thought, well, she could sit wherever she wanted to. And she had taken several trips back and forth to her hometown since leaving right after her high school graduation. And in fact, she said, even on one trip, leaving from the bus station in Washington, North Carolina, she got on the bus and the driver said, oh, here, honey, you sit just right behind me. And
Hmm.
so she had no idea that this was going to happen. But when it did happen, she was not going to put up with it.
Right.
Mm.
And so, interestingly, what you mentioned about education in the public school system, especially for Black people, you mentioned that there wasn't much of a civics education. So, interestingly, a lot of what was learned about government, about laws, it was kind of learned in the community, right? And sort of in more of these type of parochial schools. So, can you talk a little bit about that? So, what was Sarah's background academically? What was it that she learned from these schools, and how did it sort of apply to her later life?
Well, I think she learned confidence, as she said when she joined the Women's Army Corps. She said some of the people would make fun of her because she didn't have a Southern accent, and
Mm.
she said, "Well, I was taught by white folks, you know." So I think she had a sense of self-respect from that she could, conduct herself, appropriately in public and at the Women's Army Corps. And also the Women's Army, she was a very shy person, however.
Hmm.
And she said, practically shied myself to the bottom of her sisters and brothers. But she, um, she gained a lot of self-confidence from being in the Women's Army Corps. And
Mm.
yeah. So I think that it was the education she got at this parochial school that gave her self-confidence. And also watching her father. Her father, there were incidents that happened in the town, and she watched how he handled that. And he handled it in a very firm but non-confrontational way. So, like one
Mm.
time, the sisters were very good about that. However, there was a chapel at the school that anyone could attend, Black or white together at this chapel in the school, Mother of Mercy School. But when they were having mass, um, the white people would take communion first. And Sarah said, we noticed that, as we would drive home from church on Sundays, here in our own chapel, the white people got to have mass first. And there were other examples. The choir from her church sang at the white church in Washington, North Carolina, for the Christmas Eve service. And they had an excellent choir, so that's why they were invited to sing. But a cousin of Sarah's had driven them to this church because it was a midnight mass. So she said, well, of course, we could have walked, but it was midnight. And so her cousin sat in the back of the congregation waiting till the service was over and then she could drive them all home.
Mm.
And the nun who was in charge of the choir got really upset. She said, what is she doing sitting there? And raised a stink about this. And so Sarah, they told her father what had happened, and he wrote a firm letter to the archdiocese and told the head of the choir what the letter said. The letter said, "We will never sing again at that church, and
Mm.
Wow.
from then on, we will sing only at our own chapel." And Sarah said after that, that was true. And the services at the midnight services at the chapel were always filled with both black and white people because they had an excellent choir. So she saw how he handled problems. He didn't raise a fuss, but he was firm in the way he handled these things.
Wow.
Yeah, and something I found very interesting is that her personality, like being described as shy, not really outspoken. I really like, and you mentioned this in the book, how that personality doesn't really match that stereotype of like what
Right.
a an activist might, what you would imagine one to look like. And I actually found that to be, I would say I found it to be inspiring
It's a lot
because
like you. Notice that? No, seriously. Like, so just the way you handle conflict, man. It's actually a lot like you, very measured.
cool.
Yeah. Hmm.
Sticking with Sarah here, why I find that inspiring is because other people who read this book, myself included, they can see that and then kind of draw sort of a sense of like inspiration in the sense that if they found something to not be right, let's say, they don't have to think to themselves, I'm not really like a protest kind of person. I'm not really like an activist kind of person. But seeing how Sarah kind of from a place of just feeling disrespected in the moment, decided to take action. I feel like that sounds like a more grounded and like realistic kind of view of what how somebody would react and how these things come to be. Like, why does somebody take action? It's not always just like this, story we make up in our minds about what, an activist should look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I think so. And I, but it was not without consequences.
Right.
She remained quite cautious throughout her whole life because she said being arrested, that caught her by surprise, and she um, thought, well, maybe she should have reacted differently at the time, or had she done something to provoke that? And so from then on, she said she would think twice before making a statement or saying anything that might get someone to think badly of her. She never told the people. After she left the Women's Army Corps, she used her GI Bill money to go to beauty school, something that she had been interested in ever since she was a young girl.
Mm.
And she never told the people that she worked with at the beauty parlor that she got a job at afterwards that she had done this. She only told two friends in the Women's Army Corps, her two best friends in the Women's Army Corps, about this, but she didn't tell other people because she didn't know how they might react when she had no idea what was going to happen when she got arrested on that bus.
Mm.
So it was not without consequences. And so she never told the people that she lived within the apartment building for more than 30 years in Brooklyn, about what she did. And after she did win her victory, she was very reluctant to give a lot of interviews. She did give one interview, and I finally was able to get a copy of it from NBC. They interviewed her shortly after the victory was announced in 1955,
Mm.
and you can just see she was just really, really reluctant to say anything strong or forceful in it. She looked terrified in the interview, and she never had to see it because she had to work at the beauty parlor, so she didn't get home until after it was broadcast.
Mhm.
And so I tracked it down through NBC and got a copy of it. They sent a copy of it to me, and then I sent a copy of it to her.
Hmm.
And then that was, the first time she ever saw it. But so it was not without consequences. And so when she did have her own beauty parlor, and that was when the protests were going on down south with um, uh, she would the Montgomery bus boycott. She said she didn't talk about it with her clients because she wasn't sure how they would react because some of her clients were actually against the protest, thinking that's just going to get Black people in trouble, so we should just accept the way things are. So she didn't share her point of view with them. She kept everything very quiet because she didn't want to get into more trouble with other people. So it,
Mm.
her standing up was not without an impact on her, but she was very proud that she had done that.
Hmm.
And even understanding that she was quiet about these things, she didn't really talk to people about it. I still find it hard to believe how she wasn't. I mean, I guess how I would frame maybe this question that I have in mind is why do you think someone who helped desegregate interstate travel, like, why do you think that she was unknown for so long? Because that's big. It's fine if she doesn't want to give interviews and things like that, but still, it's pretty like
Right. Why didn't she have a fan base?
yeah,
Well,
essentially. Yeah.
first of all, I don't think people had fan bases back
Hmm.
then, but he 1 week after her decision was announced, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of her bus in
Hmm.
Alabama, and the Montgomery bus boycott started, which it got incredible amount of publicity, and their boycott lasted for more than a year, and it was the first um, effort that Martin Luther King Jr. led, and he got,
Hmm.
so I think it all just became much more exciting from having all that. And she was not represented by the NAACP. She was not represented by any organization. It was just her or her lawyer and the lawyer's partner. So there was no one really rooting for her to win her case at the ICC. But
Mm.
but also, she was represented by a woman lawyer. That was her
Hmm.
main representative in at the ICC. And the 1950s was there was a certain amount of male chauvinism at that time, so that could have played a part. But also, the federal government did not enforce her case.
Hmm.
It was obeyed in most parts of the country, but not in many areas of the South. And the FCC and the federal government made no effort to enforce it until after the Freedom Rides. So the
Mhm.
Freedom Rides, the young people there who went down and in bus stations, they were arrested and were mistreated, and headlines about that were around the world. And that put a very bad light on the United States at a time when it was in a contest with the Soviet Union to show,
Hmm.
democracy was better than communism. And so that forced Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy Sr. to go and tell the FCC and the federal government they had to now enforce Sara Keyes versus Carolina Coach. And he mentioned her decision in the case. And because the same day that her decision was announced, the FCC also, I mean, the ICC, not the
Hmm.
FCC,
Hmm.
ICC released a similar verdict on train travel. So after he ordered them, now you must enforce it. They did enforce it, and segregation on interstate transportation ended.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
But when they wrote about it ending, the newspaper articles were all about the courage of the Freedom Riders. They were not about
Hmm.
the courage of this sole Black woman who had one of the decisions um, was a victory of her standing up. So um, everything was just became much more exciting from then on in terms of all the different protests that went on until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed and everything. And so her story just sort of faded into the background, although it was mentioned in but some books mentioned it. Um, but only as an example of another federal agency ruling against the Plessy versus Ferguson decision that set up the policy of separate but equal.
Mm.
The Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 said that separate but equal has no role anymore in public education. And so the next year, in Sara Keyes' case, they said separate but equal has no role in transportation. So that is what, when it was mentioned in other books, it was mentioned as a victory against the separate but equal policy, that now
Mm.
two federal agencies had come out against that policy.
Mm.
Uh, but they never go into any of the details about who this woman was, whose name was on the case, Sara Keyes versus Carolina Coach Company.
Right.
Mm.
I think it was, I'm not sure what it was. It was a little bit of sexism, but also about just everything became much more exciting with large groups of people marching and protesting.
Right. And so, continuing with her background, I think this is super important, but I also want to split up this question between the values and the legal sort of precedents, I guess.
Yeah.
So just thinking about where this all stemmed from, right? You mentioned in the book that it wasn't so much about personal indignation, but it was more about the sort of bigger picture values about, community and sort of obviously in general how sort of people, a type of people were obviously treated in Black people. So can you actually speak about some of the values involved and sort of what was her psychology in that? What was sort of her thinking and what was it that she was exactly fighting for?
Yeah, well, she said that she believed in that all people should be treated fairly and treated justly, no matter what the situation. And that was her value. That is why she did this. Um, yeah, she said that several times in different interviews she's given.
Mhm.
But this was really a moral decision she had. She was offended at that they said that she had shouted and cursed. And if you ever met her, you would
Mm.
know. If you even looked at her, you would know that she was not the kind of person who was going to go around shouting and cursing. She said she didn't even learn how to do that till she
Mm.
joined the army. So uh, she was just personally offended,
Mm.
and I think that partially stems from her family background. Her father was a very like after she said when she was very young, they would go to the movie theater in town. When the movie theater had this policy that was often in movie theaters at that time, that the white people sat downstairs and the Black people had to sit up in the balcony.
Mm.
And she said she didn't like that because it made her feel less good than the people who were privileged to sit downstairs. But after a while, he said, "No, we're not going to let our children go to that movie theater anymore." And he said they didn't go. Her sister said that,
Mm.
who was 5 years younger, that she remembered that when she was growing up, the father had said, "We're not going to go to that movie theater anymore unless it was a Black movie," and they set it up as a special performance for the Black community to come, and then they could sit downstairs. But if it was on a regular movie, they would have to sit upstairs. And so he said, "We're not going to put up with that."
Mm.
So I think she saw that from the way he behaved, and also he was always a voter. It was being allowed to vote as a Black person was complicated in North Carolina at that time. You had to pass a literacy test, and it was a literacy test that the person giving the test was the one who decided whether or not you passed it,
Mhm.
whether you gave the correct answer or not. And he always voted, and his wife always, her mother always voted, and so I think she saw that he believed in being treated responsibly and respectfully, and he had served during World War II. He served at the Norfolk Navy Yards, and he so he took his responsibility for being helping the country seriously.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So
and what was so interesting to me, I mean, probably for most of the readers reading it, but it's pretty much the legal battle. And first of all, the tenacity and the determination that it took, because obviously it was a decades-long battle. But just also on top of that, your framing of it and saying that, we kind of frame these things from a moral perspective, and it's super difficult because obviously, morality differs. There's obviously a case to be made for moral relativism, maybe not so much of a great one, but the idea is that most people are going to have some version of morality that's pretty distinct from one another, right? To whatever extent, especially when we're looking at it in terms of different communities. So, with that being said, the way that she sort of framed it and the way that her lawyers framed it essentially was from a legal perspective, right? So, they sort of, it was more sort of rational, right? It was sort of like, how do we kind of point out flaws and contradictions? How do we sort of, I guess, sort of fixate on the laws and make sure that people understand that if we have, let's say, conflicting laws and conflicting systems of law, fundamentally that's going to cause especially economic confusion, but confusion more broadly. So yeah, can we actually now get into some of that, right? Sort of how was the sort of legal ball rolling, right? What were some of the cases? What were sort of some of the decisions made, and how did that sort of conflict end up creating or presenting a moment of opportunity for her and her lawyers that they were able to take advantage of?
yeah, well, so I do go into that quite the whole history. It started in the 1800s, where because there had been segregation in public transportation, from stagecoaches, where Black people would either not be allowed on or would have to, sit on the outside. And uh, it was supposed to have ended once the Civil War happened, and they passed the Civil Rights Amendments. But and for a while, right after the Civil Rights, the Civil War ended, some people just began to take seats on segregated streetcars in a number of southern cities, and succeeded in ending segregation on streetcars in southern cities
Hmm.
uh, until and then the Reconstruction started with the federal troops being stationed in the South to try to ensure that things that Black people were treated fairly. But then Reconstruction ended, and the white power people came back in charge, and segregation on streetcars and trains all returned. And it was only when people began to ex uh, uh, point out that the Constitution, the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, gave the federal government the right to regulate interactions between the states and businesses that did business between the different states. And so it was using that argument that the NAACP lawyers used in the Morgan versus Virginia case, that only the federal government had the right to establish rules about interstate transportation, not local states.
Mm.
And it took a while for that to carry forward, because of the Morgan case said there should be a uniform rule for transportation regulations. Um, but it said that a state's legislation cannot be used, but it didn't actually outlaw rules that a bus company might make. And so bus
Uh,
companies then just made their own segregation rules, and that's what tripped up Sara Keyes. So then when the the ICC,
Hmm.
yes, ruled in the Sara Keyes case, they said it could not be either um, state legislation or bus company rules. It could be nothing that would cause a segregated transportation that would uh, on buses, and they issued the same ruling for trains. So,
Hmm.
so it was, and that was because they found other court cases. There had been one court case in a federal district court where the justices there said, I'm sorry, in the Morgan case, it said there had to be a uniform rule.
Mm.
Uh, well, that meant using the word rule as a general statement of the way of doing things. And so they decided that the Morgan case did outlaw bus company rules as well as legislation. And so that was that argument that Johnson Roundtree used at the ICC and helped them decide to end segregation in buses and also in trains.
Right.
So there was this whole process of back and forth with at the beginning, the federal government was supporting equal rights, and then the white power people came back into power, and they turned it around. And so then, from 1955 in the 1960s on, it turned the other way. So it can turn back again now.
Right.
Who knows? But um,
Yeah.
during the 1960s, it was turned to end that kind of segregation.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So yeah, and then interestingly, if you're thinking about this in the context of modern times, we often, and this is not to sort of obviously minimize what's happening now, but I think that we often think about sort of the political upheaval of current times as this sort of major disaster, and in many ways, obviously, it is, especially for the people, kind of caught in the crossfires. But the point is to say it's super interesting when you look at the long arc of history and you see how often, unfortunately, the sort of its cyclical nature, right, and how often essentially things change. So, I mean, what you're ultimately seeing is that there was not really a kind of major victory. And fundamentally, there was, kind of two steps or maybe one step forward, two steps back, right? So I guess I wonder from your personal conversations with Sarah, how did she kind of handle that? That just knowing that not only did it sort of obviously, kind of take forever, so to speak, but also on top of that, that there was no kind of solid victory, that there was probably never going to come a point where it would have been so concrete that there was going to be nothing left to fight for.
Yeah, it was like incremental
Yeah,
victory.
no, well, incremental, and then also it backtracked several times, right? And again, looking at the political moment, I mean, we see this too, right? With the repeal of Roe v. Wade, the repeal of Obamacare, which is seemingly on the horizon. Like you fundamentally see that these major victories consistently take significant steps back, and it's like the well has to be replenished over and over again. So I wonder, how did she kind of deal with that? Because that level of tenacity is really impressive.
Well, she was invited. She didn't often give talks about this to anyone because she was a very quiet person. But um, one of her relatives invited her to come to talk to a school in New Jersey, high school, and she thought, well, I never do this, but I'm going to do it. And
Mhm.
so she did, and she chose an outfit to wear. I mean, she was very much interested in fashion, and she was a hairstylist, and she said, I'm going to dress myself so I will be accepted by the teenagers." And so she wore a baseball cap.
Mm.
She wore a really nice jacket and everything, and she went and she said she gave a speech to them and said, "You must never stop fighting for our rights." And these students were largely Hispanic. This was
Mhm.
a area of New Jersey, so the teacher invited them because they often don't see what their connection is to Black History Month.
Mm.
She came in Black History Month and gave a talk about what she did. And she said, "You must never stop fighting for our rights because it's very easy to lose them, and then it can take a generation to win them back again."
Wow.
So
Mm.
I think she explained to them that she knew how to walk fast and she knew how to walk slow. And
Mm.
she gave them some really wise advice, which I include in the book. She also said, you need to find someone who can help you. And she said,
Mm.
since she had her father that would help her, that she would never give up. As long as he was there helping her, she knew she would never give up. And so you want to look around, who is that right person who can help you, she said. And she also said, um, you, you she gave this thing. She said, if you if you throw a stone at every dog that passes by, I can't remember. She said it much better than I'm saying.
Hmm.
You'll never get anywhere, you know. So if you're really upset about something, maybe just sit down on the bench, and as you're waiting for the bus, and talk to someone and tell it what you're thinking about to them, and then he might give you some advice, and then you'll be able to come up with a plan, you know.
Mm,
So I think that was her not to go out and be a rabble rouser, but to find a way to work with others and get some help from others to solve the problem, which is what she did. So she got help from her father, and then she got help from this excellent young lawyer.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, and now, we're gonna get to sort of the meat of the story. So now, Amy, can you actually tell us about the night on the bus? So let's go through the step by steps, what transpired.
Yeah, so she had gotten on this bus in New Jersey, and it went through all these multiple states until it reached Roanoke Rapids, which is right over the border from Virginia. And by then, a lot of military people in military uniforms had gotten. She was wearing a military uniform. She was wearing the dress uniform of the Women's Army Corps.
mm,
And she says that if and this has been was a problem with her all her life, that she falls asleep. That was one of her problems in school, that she would sometimes fall asleep. And so she says she could fall asleep in a jiffy. So she got onto the bus, she sat down, she fell asleep, and she woke up. Uh, uh, um, I think it was a Marine got and sat next to her
Hmm.
in Virginia, and they chatted a little bit, and then she went back to sleep. And when they landed in Roanoke Rapids, the bus driver wanted them to collect. For each stop, you had to show a little tag on your ticket to show that you were supposed to be on the bus. And so he came to collect those tags, and he refused to take it from her. And he said, "I want you to move to the back of the bus." And she was
mm,
just speaking up and said, "Oh, I'm comfortable right here." She thought he was concerned about her
Hmm.
well-being.
Wow.
And so he then went on and collected more tags from different people. He came back again. He said, "I want everyone to get off the bus except for that woman who wouldn't move." And so she thought, "What? I can't stay on the bus by myself and he said, "Oh, and this bus is not going anywhere tonight." So she said, "I can't sit here, by myself. So she just got up with the other people and got her luggage, and a young Navy uh, um, person in uniform said to her, "Oh, miss, can I help you with your luggage?" And he helped get her suitcase down. And she said, "That was the nicest thing that happened to me that night. That young man who helped me with my luggage, a white Navy recruit." And so she got off with the other people, and they all lined up to get onto the other bus. And when she got to the front, they said, you're not getting on this bus tonight." So she thought, well, there was probably something wrong with my ticket. So she went into the ticket office, and she went up to the ticket booth, and the woman in the ticket booth shut the curtain and wouldn't talk to her. And she thought, what's going on? And so she turned around. There was a tall black man who was who was sweeping up, and he said, "Miss, don't you know where you are?"
Hmm.
She said suddenly she got terrified, and she thought, because she had heard stories, of course, her father read to her stories from the newspaper, and there had been a lot of examples in the World War II era and later of black people being arrested or killed or harmed by police on buses. And so she got terrified then. So she went back out to try to get onto the bus. And that's when the two officers came and said, "You're coming with us." And she said, "Okay." So they didn't handcuff her. And they just led her to the car, and she got in the car. And in the car, they drove down this dark road. And she said, "Where are you taking me?" And they said, "We're taking you to the police." "Taking you to jail." "To jail? What for?" "For disorderly conduct." She said,
Wow.
"You were there. There was nothing disorderly." And then they said, "We don't even have to get you to jail."
Wow.
And then she was really terrified, because then she was afraid that she was going to become another one of these statistics. And so when she got to the police station, the police chief said, "We're locking you up. for disorderly conduct. And she said, I know that I have a right to make one phone call. Could I please call my grandparents? And he said, no, but here, you give me the number, I'll call for you. So then they put her into this jail cell, which was filthy, filthy mattress. And she's wearing her dress uniform. And she said it was filthier than any mattress you see discarded on the streets. And she said she wouldn't sit down on it, she wouldn't touch it. So she spent the night pacing back and forth in this jail cell all by herself, praying and crying, praying and crying. And in the morning, they came and let her out, and they brought a sandwich for her. And she said she wouldn't touch anything that had come from that police station. So she went back to see the police chief, and he said, "If you have $25, what kind of a uniform? What are you wearing? What is that outfit you're wearing?"
Mm.
He said, "This is the uniform of the United States Army." So she said that it was light out now. She wasn't as afraid, and so she said, and this is probably what made her worried from the rest of her that maybe she should think twice before saying something. So she said, "You mean to tell me you don't know the color of the United States Army uniform?" And
Mhm.
that's why we locked you up because you're too damn smart. And you pay the $25 and you can go. So
Mhm.
she paid the $25. And he said, if you want to get it back, you can come back for a hearing next week. So they put her on a bus that went to her hometown. And she sat in the bus and she decided she's going to stay in the bus because she just wanted to get out of this town. And so she got home. And when she got home, there was no way for her to call her family to tell her there was no cell phones back then.
Right.
So she just arrived at the bus terminal and she took a taxi out to her family's farm. And it was Sunday morning, and they had expected her to arrive on Saturday morning. And so they went to church at the Mother of Mercy of Schools Chapel. And then they came back. Her father said, "You have to tell me what happened. Why were you so late?" And so then she told him, and she said he got angrier than she'd ever seen him before. He was just furious, and then he began. And she said, "They said was disorderly, but I wasn't disorderly." And he said, "No, that's what they say when they can't get you for anything else." So she said, "They said I could go back to try to get the charges dropped." And he said, um, do you want to do that?" And she said, "Yes, if you think that's what we should do." And so
Mm.
he did go back twice, and it didn't work. And they brought in the man who was sweeping the floor, who testified that she had cursed and swore and was disruptive and she was just shocked that why would he say that, you know?
Mm.
And then her father, who had lived in Washington, D.C., and it would often go even to Washington, D.C. and do construction jobs. He had contacts there, and he called them and said, can you recommend a lawyer? And so they recommended W. Johnson Roundtree, who had just graduated from Howard Law School. And so then they went and took a bus without any trouble to Washington, D.C. and met with her, and that's how it all started.
Wow.
Wow. You know, it's crazy in the context of when she was traveling, 1952, Jim Crow South. That I swear people today, unless they're just aware, they read about the history and all that, uh, they completely underestimate how horrifying that time period was in that area. Like, yeah, if people don't know, they really like by reading this book, also just looking into it, you can really get a context of what kind of danger she was really in traveling alone, you know, for part of that night. You know, before, of course, you know, being taken by the police, but like anything could have happened, right?
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, just had to say that because putting it into you already put it into context, but just that gravity of how dangerous it was to be black in that area is just
Right.
people
So,
truly
so,
underestimate. Yeah.
so interesting, right? So, I
Yeah.
guess I wondered then from her perspective, especially kind of down the line as you knew her, Amy. So, I mean, did she feel like it was something that was sort of common or as common, like those sort of, I guess, in terms of the actual like structural racism? Did she feel like it was just as common as it was like in her time? Did she feel like it was a little less common, but there was a way for it to become more frequent? Or did she see it as a kind of let's say, a sense of kind of like eternal progress, right? Where we're sort of moving down the line? Because like this is sort of the argument that we kind of have, right? Whether it's silly or not, I mean, it is something that kind of happens where the understanding or the positions are one side will say, well, there's this underlying racism that's honestly percolating, and even if to tie this into Nazism, like even though there isn't a current Holocaust, right? There's still, let's say, in this case, a deep anti-Semitism, and so with Black people, there's obviously, especially in the South, a deep sense of racism, and then there's another side, the Steven Pinkers of the world who will say like, well, there's this eternal progress, right? Like as bad as things were before, we're way far down the line from that, and that's probably a space that we'll never return to, even though I'm not sure that that's exactly his position, but at least it feels like it's implied. So I wonder how Sarah saw it, especially, kind of looking at the gravity of what she's experienced and also like the extent of it in terms of a lifetime of it. So I wonder if she saw it as, okay, we're sort of heading into the right direction, or did she think at any moment it could just go back there?
Mm.
Well, I think she thought it could go back.
Yeah.
That's why she told those high school students, to never stop fighting for our freedom. Uh, yeah, I think but she wasn't one to be giving, standing up and taking part in a protest or anything like that. So she was a very reserved person, uh, reserved and private person. But she went to that talk, and she also gave a talk a number of times at a local library, and she gave an interview on the Brian Lehrer show. You probably listened to the
Mm,
Brian Lehrer show. So he interviewed her in 2009,
mm.
and she spoke like that then too. So you can actually, I'll send you a link to that if you
Okay,
want.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so what made her feel hopeful?
Oh, what made him feel hopeful? I think family makes her feel hopeful.
Mm,
Family and personal relationships, a very strong family, and they're very um, close with each other. And she even sort of adopted my grandson. I had a grandson born during the last couple of years of her life, and she always wanted to have a new picture of him.
mm,
And she fell a year before she died. She died in 2023, and the year before she fell and severely injured herself, and so had to go into a sort of not a hospice situation, but it was a
like a nursing home
senior,
care. Yeah.
a
Hmm.
nursing home, seniors care. And so she kept Solomon's photo on her by her bed. And so I think family and personal connections and but she was very much wanted these books to be published. And she read preliminary versions of them and to make sure that I got it right, because she
Mm,
always wanted to make sure that when I interviewed her that what I said was going to be the correct get the facts right.
mm,
And that was really interesting though. Uh, so we talked over nearly 20 years, but not constantly,
mm,
but when this new event happened, which is when the main reason why we wrote these books is the community in Roanoke Rapids, and the Black community there finally found out about her
mm,
by accident in 2010.
mm,
And they found that we had written my first efforts to talk to her in 2004 led to a little book in 2006 for very young children. And that a man named Rodney Pierce was working as a tour guide in the local History Museum in Roanoke Rapids. And the leader of that had been going back and looking at old newspaper clippings to find something to put up in their museum for Black History Month. And he found an old clipping about Sara Keyes Evans. So he put up a little sign about her. And Rodney Pierce was working at the museum and he saw that. And then he saw an ad for our little book that we wrote in 2006. He saw an ad for that in a Black History magazine. And so he emailed us and said he wanted his city to honor her and apologize to her. So we said, okay, we'll help. So we sent copies of the book to him and he gave them to other Black educators in Roanoke Rapids. And they formed a committee and entered a contest sponsored by the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation to give money to local communities to put up public art about North Carolina heroes whose story are not well known. Well, she's a perfect example. So they had her be interviewed. And so she and I arranged for the interview to take place at the library in Brooklyn, right near her apartment. And they videographer who interviewed her told that story that I just told you about how she was arrested. And they sent that in with their application to the Z. Smith Reynolds, and they won. And so in 2020, they installed this very large monument in the town's Martin Luther King Jr. Park, which has two arcs, brick arcs, and on the inside of these two arcs are four illustrations, mural illustrations on each side that tells her story. And she was just very thrilled about that, but she was insisted on accuracy too. When they sent her the copies of what the illustrations were going to look like, she would not allow them to do because they had the police officers putting her in handcuffs. She said there was no handcuffs, there was no disturbance, and so they had to take out the handcuffs. And so she wanted to make sure that they told the story that was the truth of what happened. And so they call her a and see, she said she wanted to be known as a trailblazer. She won the Trailblazer Award from the Department of Justice Brooklyn office. And so that's what they call her on the monument, a trailblazer for justice. And they have now, so they installed it on August 1st of 2020, which is the day anniversary of the day when she got on the bus to come and wound up in Roanoke Rapids in 1952. But, the next year, they started a Sara Keyes Evans Trailblazer Award, which they are going to give every year to people who are working to try to make the world better. And so I went in 2 years ago for their event in Roanoke Rapids. And that year they were giving it out to people who were doing things for healthcare justice. But they also gave an award to Rodney Pierce, the one who contacted us. And he gave him a Trailblazer Award. And he then had just been, was running for election, and he was elected as a state representative from the Roanoke Rapids area. So he's now in the state legislature.
Oh, very cool.
Running for re-election now.
And sort of, okay, and as we start to wrap up, so one of our final questions is going to be, what can politically inclined yet introverted people learn from Sara?
To get help, like she said, find a lawyer, file suit, stand up for find out what your rights are, and stand up for them in a firm but orderly legal way. I don't think she would advise you to go out and cause a problem in a demonstration, but file a lawsuit or make sure that the school system is living up to what it said it was going to do for your students or whatever.
But I also assume she wasn't against sort of vocal protesting. She was just probably more so of a compliment to it.
I'm not sure she was ever in favor of vocal protest.
Oh, wow, interesting. Oh, well, I wonder what would her thoughts been?
I think she was to do the way that's going to actually get results,
Mm.
which in her mind was to bring some sort of a legal suit, because what they had done to her, in her mind, was illegal and unjust and unfair. And so she wanted to have it fixed.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. So I'm
Right.
curious if she had any thoughts, before we wrap up. What were her thoughts on Black Lives Matter and the protest then?
I never talked about it.
Okay, that would have been interesting. Okay. I mean, because at this point, I mean, I would view it as more of a compliment. I would say that we need both. But I mean, I also can see from her perspective why the thinking is, as we talked about when we began the show, like the measured responses and the long-term thinking a lot of times is what gets stuff done. Okay, Alan, final questions for Amy before we wrap up.
Yes. If we wanted to follow you, follow your work, and of course, pre-order or buy the book, where can we do that?
Oh, you can buy it from Duke University. I'm sure they sent you the link to it
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
It'll all
Oh,
be
of
up there.
course,
Yeah.
include
Awesome.
all the
I like
links.
that.
Yeah.
It's also I've pre-ordered it from Amazon,
Hmm.
but I think any bookstore would have it because it's being published by a legitimate publisher. So
Mm.
any regular bookstore would be able to have
Yeah.
copies of it.
Any website or social media you want to plug?
I'm on Facebook, but
Okay, cool.
Cool.
yeah, I'm sort of an old-fashioned person. I don't do any of these social media things, but I am on Facebook.
Good for you, man. That is the right way to live. Okay, Amy, thank you so much for this.
It was
This
a
was so
pleasure.
insightful.
Thank you.
No, thank you for your interest.
Absolutely. Take
Absolutely.
care. See ya.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. So, everyone, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. On X, we're at Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe,
Hit
hit
the
the bell
bell
on
on YouTube.
YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.